We are talking about the JSON API specifications. Those are accessible at jasonapi.org/format. And you can just take a look at it. It's a really long document, but it's okay to read it. I'll just give a quick overview about the most important stuff. So if you go to the point document structure, you'll see that in the top level document, the document must contain at least one of the following top member keys, which is data, errors, or matter. And yeah, most likely we'll use the data object for everything. And if we encounter an error, user input or server-side error, we will populate the errors key. And going off of that, we have the next interesting thing would be resource objects. So resource object is kind of the data the API has. It has an ID and a type by which it is identified. So if you have the same ID and the same type, it is the same object. You can't have any collisions there.
Can you have one being matching, or do they both have to be?
Yeah, of course. So type would be, for example, user, and type would, for example, be article.
Yep.
And you would have the first article would have the ID 1, and then the next would be ID 2, and so on. And the combination of type and ID is one entity.
Okay.
I think ID so ID must be a string, and I think we could even give it some UUID thing, or just some MongoDB ID that it creates.
Right, as far as to be able to like a user ID or a user ID.
Yeah, for example, or for every object, for that matter, because we could also have our own ID mapping thing, but that would be extra work. And if we can just use the ID that, for example, MongoDB provides, it is much easier.
Right.
So then resource object also has attributes, relationships, links, or metadata. Attributes is whatever you want it to be. So you can, for the users, we could have a username, first name, last name, street address, whatever. Those would all be inside the attributes. And attributes can be any type. So we can put in there list or sub-objects or strings, numbers, whatever. This is just everything that is actually the content of that object. Right. Those are the attributes. Then we have the relationships, and there it gets interesting because those are the relationships to other objects. If we go to currently on GitHub, I have a pull request open on the backend. It's it's a work in progress pull request. It's pull request number 12.
The RAML draft?
Yeah.
All right, I'm pulling it up right now, and then we'll have the links in the description, or not the description, but the whatever links.
Yeah, somewhere.
Let's see. Let's look at the file.
If you scroll down to line 64, we have the example for the Contributors Endpoint.
Oh, okay.
Where I had some ideas on how to do it, and I'll see how it works out. But the idea is we have the top level data. There we have a list of all contributors, and type is contributor, ID is then just incrementing, could be anything. Then we have the attributes. As stated, it is just some data, so we could have, for example, GitHub GitHub username. We could have links to Twitter or any other social media.
And that would
We
go
could
in the
have
attributes
stuff.
section?
Yeah,
Okay,
that is just everything that we wanted to do.
cool.
And I wanted to get a bit fancy with the contribution areas, just to see how I would model it. So I created for the first entry of contributors with the ID 1, I created the relationships key in there, and I wanted to relate the contribution areas to it. There we have some links that those must be in there.
Okay, so
So
this is the
line
part that
77 and 78.
right. Okay, so this is the part that I get a little bit lost on. What these the keyword links, that's not referring to like an anchor link.
So links contains a link object, and that by itself is not really explanatory. But if you look at in the specifications, you will see some example usages. And if you have a relationship, you also need to have a link to that relationship. So that would be the self link. You can also have a more nicer link that can be a bit more human readable and not so much relies on the specification with the related link, but we don't actually need it. The self link is the important one that the specifications actually define that you need it.
And what is that exactly for? Is that like a reference point to like where it's at in the API, or I guess what's the
Yes, so
I'm not
it's
really
just
sure what the point of that is.
yeah, it's just a link to the API. So you see that we have the contributors endpoint. Then we
Yep.
would go to ID 1. Then we want to look at the relationships of that ID, and we want the relationships in regards to contribution areas.
Oh, okay.
So this is how it is.
Excuse me.
How it is. How you would see it semantically.
Okay, so that's just like essentially like how it's gonna look in.
Yeah,
Okay.
and all that endpoint would return would be the data. You see in the contribution area, I have an array of data where I say which contribution area and which ID that contribution area has.
Yep.
And as we discussed earlier, we with the type and the ID, we can directly identify any object in the API.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to query the contribution area, we could do it. But without going too far, you can scroll down to line 109.
The
You can have
includes array.
included data. Yes. So if you have, for example, here you have some data that actually it needs to be in there because it just you don't want to have a separate API call for the contribution areas in the front end. So you want it in one request, but you want to still have some kind of abstraction between them or something. So you create different, what's the terminology again? Resource objects, and then have them always be included in this included key of the top level document. And here I can just include any resource I want. And yeah, you see that the contribution area has an ID and the attribute would just be the name. So for this, it's not really helpful, but it might be helpful for other things like if we finally have users or I have
Gotcha. So
no
this is
yeah.
just kind of like overkill at this point, but when we have a bigger API structure
Yeah,
and like a built out API structure, then something like the included array is
yeah,
going to be a
might
lot more
happen.
helpful.
Yeah, and I just wanted to see how it looks and if it's easy to work with. It is not. I can say you that much. Yeah. So if we go further, we have also a second contributor. I just entered your details because why not? And you see that the contribution area links to self on line 98. No, 8, 90? Yeah, 98. Is now contributors with the ID 2, and then the relationships contribution areas. And there you contribute to the areas 1, 3, and 4. I contributed to the areas 1, 2, and 5. And so we need to include 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in here. So the backend would actually need quite a bit of logic here to know which resources need to be included, which is, yeah, it's a bit. I think it's easy once we have it done for one endpoint, because then we can just copy and paste it. But having it robust and include all the documents we need for the first endpoint or the first time we implement it would be really difficult.
Right. Well, okay, so I guess my next question is that based on what you have mocked up, excuse me, in this, are you still behind the JSON API architecture?
I am.
Okay, cool. That's
So it's once I got my head around it, it's really easy. So you have a type and an ID, and you can just put everything you want to have in the attributes. And if you want to refactor it into separate files, for example, for everyone that has done relational
relationship,
relational
data relationship.
database modeling. So the SQL, the old one, not the NoSQL like MongoDB, but the old SQL databases, you would have these kinds of refactorings into other tables all the time. And JSON API, yeah, has the capability of doing that too with the relationships and the related included data.
All right.
So that's how I look at it.
All right. So cool. So that's what we're going to be using then. Let me just pull this back up.
Yeah.
Is there anything any gotchas that you came across right away that we should be aware of as a development team, or like anything that we should keep in mind as far as best practice, other than just following the spec or whatever?
For now, I would say no. We can just so actually for the backend, we have the complete Git workflow implemented as it is right now. So we have just let me look at the history. Yeah, we have the release branch that I created. It has been merged to master. We have a release tagged on master. We have a release candidate tagged on the old release branch. And yeah, there everything is set up that we could actually start working for real. And for the development version, so if you have looked at semantic versioning, so samware.org, just let me open the website. samware.org.
A stunning design.
Version 2. Yeah, it's simple and still. So if we scroll down to, where was it? So semantic versioning specifications, you have the point 4.
Sorry, I'm way too far. Major version 0?
Yeah, so major version 0 is for initial development. Anything may change at any time. The public API should not be considered stable. And we actually now have the version 0.1.0 deployed. So we can just sketch up some API even already program it in Express and just release it as 0.2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And because we can change anything at any time, it's we
It's
can
not
just
locked in.
yeah,
We can refactor, redo the whole thing if we need to as many times as we want before we go to 1.0, and I think that's a good thing
correctly.
to keep in mind as we doing this, that we can just throw away what we have if it's not working, if we get to a point and start over, or not necessarily start over, but like we can make drastic changes without having to worry about like how it's going to affect other aspects
so
of
no
things.
need to think about anything. Is this a major breaking change or is this a minor change? This comes once we have version 1.0.0.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we have version 1, we that is considered a stable public API. And if we have any breaking changes, we actually need to increment the major version. But for the initial development phase, we can just do whatever we want to do at any time, because actually, who cares? We are controlling the front end and the back end. So there shouldn't be too much of an issue if we have enough communication between the two teams. So
Perfect. Cool.
there's that. Do we have anything else to talk about?
I think so. What are some action items as far as like development of the back end in order to get started? I know we have a back end node or Express app already pushed and built, right?
Well, not really, no.
No?
I have,
I
as far
mean,
as
just like
CI,
a boilerplate.
yeah, so we have the boilerplate, we have everything in the source directory of the backend thing, where now there's one file. But I think per the last meeting we had, was it on the 6th of February? I don't know.
Something like that.
We have decided on a folder structure based on modules,
Yep.
I suppose. We have a pull request open currently for setup initial folder structure, where exactly that is discussed again.
Yeah, and I think that's
And
from some of the members that are getting back into the swing of things. So
yeah,
we'll discuss that later tonight and clear it up so that everybody is on the same page as far as the folder structure for the back end as well.
yeah. So CJ has just commented 2 hours ago on that pull request and yeah,
Yep.
clarified how we want to have the folder structure.
Yep.
And then, yeah,
Cool.
we'll set it up that way and it will be done. So a question that you asked, but I didn't answer actually, was how to work with RAML or RAML, or I don't know how to call it. So you have raml.org, where the specification for this RESTful API modeling language, yeah, the specification is there, but it's much easier to actually not look at this specification and just using the, what is it called, API designer. This is a node module. You can just install it globally, npm, yeah, install -g API-designer, and then you can just create a new .raml file and have all the contents there. And you can actually put in the RAML file from my pull request, for example, to see how that would render on screen, and yeah, have it set up.
Okay. Sweet. That sounds like if that's what you recommend, then we should do that. It seems pretty easy. A lot more straightforward than trying to go through the spec.
Yeah, it's much easier, and you can in the API designer on the bottom sheet you have everything that you can define on that. on that indentation level. So if I would go to the top level indentation, I can set media type, version, base URI, title, whatever. If I go to the /FAQ, I can set get, post, put, delete, whatever the HTTP verbs are. And then I can set responses, descriptions for every endpoint, and so on. It just is a pretty handy tool to yeah, get stuff done quick.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay, let me look into Discord for anything else that we might need to do. I don't see anything that we need.
So is there any cards that need to be made or fixed? Not fixed, but modified in a couple of different things, probably.
I need to log into Trello. So, yeah, you can go to CA29 and just assign yourself. You can work on the API RAML that I have initially laid out. It's just, yeah, it's a branch on the app backend repository. So you can just push your own commits to it, and then we can talk about if that makes sense or not, the changes, or if the design is good or not.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's the only thing I think we need
do
to
we
do.
need to make 3 different ones then, or we need to make a different one for each endpoint? Or like, do we need to make one for the
files?
FAQ, or and then the contributors page info, and then like history?
So you're talking about the API RAML, right?
Like, sorry, are we supposed to be, do we need to design like an API sketch for each individual endpoint? Or
I don't quite get the question. So we can have everything in this one file, api.raml.
Okay.
But you'll see on line 7, I have defined the /FAQ endpoint. And on line 30, yeah, one indentation level deeper, we have the /FAQ/FAQ ID endpoint.
I see what you're saying. That makes sense. So
the same with the contributors, and then finally with the history if we actually need to.
ID. Okay, so everything is going to be built into one RAML file for the API.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't sure if we were going to like work separately on different things or just merge into one file.
We could do it with different things, but it's much easier to actually use one file and then finally render it down to some HTML that can be displayed on the documentation page, whatever.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I'm just looking through the Trello board right now.
One thing that I am still unclear about, what is CL31, determine backend dev leads.
I don't know. It was just like when we were first meeting, we were trying to figure out if we're gonna have some like team leads and whatnot. So I think like Joshua and I are heading up the front end for front end team and kind of front end aspects and design and whatnot. But if we can get somebody that can kind of like oversee the progress of the back end, as like a team lead, that would be, or even multiple team leads, if somebody is capable of doing that, that would be, I think, really helpful for the progress of the
Yeah.
repo and whatnot. So that's
Okay.
all that refers to. So if anybody, I'll bring it up tonight, but if anybody's listening to this after the fact, if they're interested in that and feel like we can talk about it and whatnot and figure out if it'll work, and yeah, I don't know, shouldn't be a problem. We just need to figure
Yep.
out somebody that can kind of keep track of things and everything can't all go through me because I'm gonna get things mixed up.
Yep.
Cool. All right, cool, man. Well, thanks for checking in with us, and I will pass this information along to anybody who needs it. And I
Yep.
took a video. I did a screen capture or whatever, so I'll probably put it on YouTube, I guess. And it's got the documentation and the GitHub file and stuff we were looking at as you were talking through, so it should be cool.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. So have a great evening, and yeah, see you
Good.
sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye bye.
Have a good night. Bye.